In this video on Google Sheets, I'm going to show you how to use data validation. Data validation is a really great way to restrict what values that you can put in certain cells, show people a warning if they enter data that is outside of those values, and allow people to select a cell's contents from a list. Let's get started. We're going to start here with my Amazon cart, which I've gone over in previous videos here. I'm going to go right here into the number of units, and I'm going to show you how to use data validation to restrict and make sure that people are only entering numbers. As we know, if I change this number, it's going to reflect the other things in there. But if I was to put something else in there, like accidentally typing the word to, you can see it's going to mess everything up. So we'd want to make sure to restrict it so it's only numbers. To do so, I'm going to select this column of data right here. And I can either right click on it and go to data validation, or I can go up here, hit data, and then validation. What I want to do is I want to change my criteria. My cell range is already taken care of. I want to change my criteria to a number. And I want to make sure that number, I have a lot of different options here. I'm going to say it's greater than 0. And I have the option to either show a warning or straight up reject input. I'm going to show you the difference right now. I'm going to leave it at just show warning and hit save. Now, if I was to come in here and accidentally type that, what's going to happen, of course, it's going to screw everything up, and I've got this little red flag right there, and it's saying invalid content. This cell's contents violate its validation rule that we just set up. So what I could do instead of allowing that thing to still screw with my data, I'm going to change this. I'm going to go back to my data validation, and I'm going to change it to reject input. Now if I was to try that, it would say, the data you entered violates the data validation rules, and it won't actually let me do it. So now it's going to pretty much force you to enter a number and won't let you enter anything otherwise. As you probably saw there, some of the other options I have with data validation is I could do number greater than. Let's say I want to do a number that is between 0 and 3. And now I'm going to reject input. But now what I'm going to do is I'm also going to add little help. You don't want to just straight up reject a number or a cell entry or whatnot. You want to make sure that they are aware of it. Here it's saying enter a number between 0 and 3, and I could add a nice little note from my wife. And I'm going to hit save. Now if I go back here and I change that, I could use, I don't know, a few more A wings, and I change that to 4, it's going to be no. Enter a number between 0 and 3, and it's whatever that note is. It's always a really good idea to make sure that you are including a note for why you are rejecting it. Otherwise, it would just reject it, and you would have no idea why it was being rejected. So always make sure you show help, and I recommend doing reject input. That way nothing will be messed with. Anytime you want to remove the validation, I'm just going to click on the box down here. The normal thing of querying formatting won't actually work here. Like if I was to go to format and click clear formatting, that won't actually remove data validation. To remove that, you have to select the range you want, go to data validation, and remove it down there. Now another way that you can validate the data is to really restrict the choices they have and let them know what those choices are. So I'm going over to my data validation tab. I'll use that in just a second. But right now I want to show you a really simple way that I could set up almost like a yes-no question. So I'm almost putting in the cell here, I'm almost asking them for a response, is Star Wars better than Star Trek? Now, I want to restrict it because I don't want them typing the letter Y or N or yes, but I just want to restrict it to something simple. So I'm going to go to data validation, and I'm going to go to list of items, where it says I enter items separated by a comma. Well, I'm just going to do yes or no. And I just leave that comma right here, and I'm going to say reject input. If they try to validate it, only those. So you'll see now they could sit here and physically type yes, or they could physically type no. But what they're probably going to do is they're going to probably hit that drop-down arrow where it gives them those options. If you don't want to, you could remove that drop-down arrow here with data validation and get rid of that display in cell button. But it's probably a good idea that people know that you're restricting the data to just a couple different choices. So here I'm going to keep that so that they can see it. Is Star Wars better than Star Trek? Obvious answer is yes. But now with data validation, I can give them that option there and make sure that nothing else goes in there that I don't want. Alright, now let's say I want to do a question that's a little bit more open-ended. I still want them to pick from a list, but I want it to be from a larger list. Now let's say I want them to pick from all these different Star Wars characters here, because I'm asking the question, who is the best Star Wars character? Now, I already have all the data right here. I don't want to have to retype that. So what I'm going to do for data validation, instead of list of items and having to retype all of those out, I'm going to do list from a range. And now it's asking me to select the range right here. I'm going to click that. And move that as necessary. So I'm selecting from A2 to C8. I'm going to hit OK, reject input, again, just a better idea, and hit save. Now it's saying who's the best Star Wars character, and when you click on that, all of them are right there. The cool part is if you add something new to this range, it doesn't matter what it is, that's going to be a new option. Let's say no one cares about Porkins. Let's say I want to add BB-8. Just because I changed that range right now, here, that option is going to show up right there. Anything that I have in there will be now one of my options. If I was to remove this, all of a sudden this cell is now violating those contents because I changed it there and it no longer exists. Add it back in and it's okay with that. One thing to note here, if I want to delete this part right here, if I select it all and hit the delete or clear, I haven't removed the validation. I just removed those cell entries. Again, when you want to remove validation, right click, data validation, remove validation. Another really cool option I have with data validation is with text. I could change what text they're going to be putting in here. So let's go with this cell right here. I want to go to text, contains, and I have a lot of different options here. Let's try first off, is a valid email. Again, I'm going to reject it if it's not in there. Now, if you're asking for someone's email, and they were to put in something like this, it would say, no, what you put violates the data validation rule set on the cell. This is a really good reason to always include a little bit more specifics other than you violated it, but to say, I need a valid email address. So let's try that again. Now it's okay with it. If I, of course, was to remove the last part of my email address, all of a sudden that would start to violate it. I have other options here as well. I could go to, is a valid URL. It's okay with that, but not okay with just Google. So I need to make sure that I'm entering a valid URL for that one if you want people to paste in URLs for different websites. We could do something else. We could go into data validation, and I could say text does not contain the word, let's say, Hotmail. Now, I might be asking their email addresses, but I want to be a little bit more selective about who I'm letting in and saying no Hotmail addresses. So if I was to do it incorrectly, it would say, I'm sorry, that violates the rules. And so you could prevent that. You could also do another one where you're asking them to enter a date. And in this particular cell here, I'm going to go to data validation, and I want them to enter a date. And I have a lot of different options. Is a valid date, is before or after. Let's do is after. And I want to say the date that Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens, comes out. So now, I'm still looking for them to enter a date. It has to be in the format of a date, but it has to be after that specific date. Let's try entering today's date. And it does not like that. I want to show you a combination that I have of both data validation and conditional formatting. Let's say I've set up this table here, the different lightsaber colors that you see across the two Star Wars trilogies. And I've set this up to say, which lightsaber color do you want to know? And I'll say, I don't know, Qui-Gon Jinn, and you'll see that it turns green. I have a combination here of conditional formatting, turning this the different color, as well as data validation where I'm selecting from that list. So let me show those. If I right-click and see conditional formatting, you can see I have a bunch of different hierarchy of rules, searching for different things, but under data validation, I have this particular rule, criteria list from a range, and that range happens to be A3 to D7. So it's picking from those, rejecting input, and changing the background based on that. Now, if I was to want to copy this further on down, I could just select these cells and paste down here. The data validation has gone with it, the conditional formatting has gone with it as well. So just copying and pasting is one way that you could do it. Now, if we were to use the paint format, that wouldn't actually be useful here. If I select these cells and hit paste format down to here, it doesn't carry down all the different things that I have with it. That data validation I'll need to paste in another way. If you do want to copy your data validation, you just copy the cell. Down here, I'm going to go to Edit, Paste Special, and I want to paste data validation only. Now, I have the exact same data validation that I had up there, going with the exact same rules that I set up over here. So that's how you do it. Paint format won't do it. You need to copy and paste special. One final thing that's a really great combination of all these different things is the ability to use a named range. Now, you can select based off of a range, but sometimes it's hard to remember where you have. So I'm going to show you how to create a named range. Right here I have my list of Star Wars characters, but I've added on some open area at the bottom here because I want the ability to add more, but I want to make it so that it's a named range so I can refer to it much easier. So I'm actually going to select this entire thing, and I'm going to go to Data and go to Named Ranges. When I do here, I'm going to call this Star Wars Characters. It's important to note here, you can't use spaces in here. Everything's got to be one word. If I was to do it without that, it wouldn't like it. So it says invalid characters, make sure you don't have any spaces. Now I've created a named range. What good is that? Well, I'll show you. If I'm to do my data validation and I wanted to do list from a range, now rather than having to select that, I can just type this. Star Wars characters, reject input. So it's just like before, but the great benefit is if you're on a different page, you want to say, ooh, I want this one here. Again, you can do data validation, and instead of having to remember what that range was, I could again just type. Now, with these named ranges, you can refer to them much easier. So, same as before, but I have data validation off of a named range. Makes it way easier for you when you're trying to refer to things multiple times.